This is a demo or a talk about representing the city of Chicago, both in digital and physical spaces. So hopefully there's a little something on here for everybody. So let's start with the basics, kind of who, what, when, where, how, and why. I'm Jason Kunesh. Those are my Twitter handles. I have no idea generally what I'm doing. I've made a career of that for the longest time. This is how I'm convinced people think that people become designers over time. We all know the truth. It's actually a lot of hard work and craft, but from the outside, it looks a little bit more like magic and something that just kind of comes to people in some incredible way. I started out with the career really as a poster and a flyer designer as a musician. And, from that kind of became a web designer and eventually, worked my way into, this incredible team and opportunity. And from working with Obama for America, I then went, put your pot joke in here, to the Department of Innovation and Technology 420 down at the corner of a State and Jackson. I see Tom Schenk as one of the participants here. He was the chief data officer at the time and one of the big draws of going to a team like that with the idea that we'd really do resident engagement and really understand new ways to do digital service and information delivery for residents, really using technology and really user-centered design to build with people, not just for them. And oddly enough, that led to this moment, which is me shaking hands with Mayor Lightfoot. We started the work under Mayor Rahm Emanuel with Commissioner Lori Lightfoot or Commissioner Daniel Dumer. We ended it with Mayor Lori Lightfoot and Commissioner David Reynolds, who's the gentleman with the gray hair there. That person in the background with that angelic smile floating off the ground, that is actually PK. That's the person who made the typeface for the city of Chicago. I think he probably actually at this moment can't actually believe this is happening, right? It was a very long journey. So we'll talk about that. We'll show you where we went and kind of how we got there. First, we'll talk a little bit about Chicago government. So for you to understand kind of the structure of what we deal with, City of Chicago, it's a mayor's office, 19 departments. We are one departments of assets, information and services. There's also the police department, the fire department is kind of separate budget teams. You also have the city clerk, city council, and the city treasurer is really independent kind of legal entities, right? So they have their own teams and their own kind of presences. And then you've got library, parks, and schools, which are the so-called sister agencies. So again, they have their own kind of brand identity, agenda, operations, et cetera. So all encompassed, you're talking, at least for the city budget, about $11 billion. And when we took over, or when I joined, somewhere around 500 plus logos under management. So a lot of different stuff. Why do we brand stuff? Basically a couple of reasons, really trust, accountability, partnership. Either we're saying this is us, this is somebody we believe in, or in some cases, we leave our name off. There's a lot of times we deliver services and information in areas where people actually wouldn't trust it if it came from Chicago. So dwell on that one for a minute. But, the job is to actually get this stuff out so you get the job done. Why did we look at doing a rebrand? Basically 3 reasons. Again, it saves us a lot of money. It's an $11 billion budget. So if we can save money by developing standards, then we can apply those standards consistently and get more out of any money that we spend on things that go out and touch residents in some way. Why also? Really to look good and to be a little bit more forward thinking in terms of how we represent ourselves and really leaning into what people in our community actually kind of view as their representation of Chicago. And we'll get more into that as we kind of go. And then finally, again, really enforce standards. And we'll talk about that in a sec. So what standards, I'm going to mute myself. Hold on one sec. Excuse me, I've been talking all day in the government job. Okay, so our standards that we basically go with a lot are really these ones. I call them RULA, readability, usability, language access, and accessibility. So the things I tend to try to look at when we do design of any sort is if you were somebody with about an 8th grade education who's probably a Spanish speaker, maybe on a mobile device, on a card or a paper plan, can you understand information and make decisions to help yourself and your family in times like COVID, right? So that's kind of where we kind of set the bar. And really, when we talk about design, it's a very different standard and a very different look at design. And honestly, it's a standard that quite often we fail because as a city, it's really difficult to adhere to and really get this right consistently, given our size and our scale. And there's not a lot of people who really understand in detail some of these issues, and we'll talk about that as we go. Oop, I keep on hitting the wrong key and making weird noises. Sorry, I hope you don't hear those. All righty. What do we brand? Really anything. The city has its own bookbinding system in book printing. We do on-site, we can do cards and reports and stationery and all sorts of stuff. We do deals for the advertisements and the billboards, obviously all kinds of websites, and really beyond websites into, you name it, social, Nextdoor, live streaming, YouTube, Facebook, etc. Step and repeats, vehicles, masks, really anything physical that you can think of in some way. Either we can print or we can control the printing of it for the city. The weird part is that we can't always control the people who are controlling it. So as designers, we get a lot of different looking stuff. And again, we could kind of talk about that too as one of the challenges. So, for us, what's a design system? When we talk about what we did on March 4th, which is about a year ago now, Chicago's birthday, was a design system, not just a logo. And so the idea is really that it's, something that really serves, this is kind of highfalutin, right? A product service ecology. But I think Hugh's onto something here. He's a Hugh Dubberly. He's the person who did the Knowledge Navigator, right? That realistically, all this stuff ladders up, right? So you need to kind of have some fundamental building blocks that then you can use to actually kind of walk the walk of your strategy. So in our case, Mayor Lightfoot has very firmly grounded her belief in, accessibility and equity, social justice. So a lot of what we're trying to do then is kind of produce with the design system things that kind of have the capability to carry that sort of information or service. What does that mean? It's how we work together to make things for us, for the public, how we do it together. So, overall, this idea of rebranding was happening a lot. It kind of out in the ether of the civic space. Boston was one of the first who did it, and they really kind of moved away from their seal. They adopted Gotham, at the time was all the rage because of Obama for America. They had the B logo there, and they moved away from their seal, and they kind of kept it as a kind of blown up watermark. And if you look at their seal, like I don't speak Latin, but generally speaking, it's pretty inoffensive, right? It's like, well, there's some buildings. Okay. So that's that. You also saw it at the national level. Here's Canada, Colorado, state level. This is Helsinki. So actually this one, they had a series of kind of these shapes, colors like this, their own custom typography. So it got a little deep. Like I really like the line shape between the L and the S. It's a custom, right? They had all these sort of little, very distinct kind of flavors to the letter forms. Melbourne is interesting. So all of a sudden you start to get into some playability, right? What does a variability mean? Here's the shape. This actually predates Medium, but very similar logo type. And interesting in how it played. They're still using this. So this is NYC. And again, really very interesting campaign. The big block letter shape, they kind of use their own as just the black up there on top, like solid knocked out. But because of it, they've been able to use it, all their marketing. Excuse me. So we talked about before different forms of government. So for Chicago, two things we didn't talk about are Choose Chicago, and now I'm forgetting their name, but there's another sort of marketing and civic engagement tourism arm. And this is kind of the equivalent effort from New York City. So it's interesting that you had the municipal part, and then you also had the kind of more outreach part, which did a lot of the work that you see down below. A couple things to note, there is a difference in the marks, right? So for the public mark, which is the little Chicago thing, that's different than the I Love New York, right? So I Love New York is not a municipal mark. And we had a lot of conversation about this because actually, oddly enough, like the I Love New York symbol makes New York about, it's like 35 million. I can't remember if it's a year. Anyway, it's a significant amount of money. Like we looked it up. And it's actually like administered in this weird like contract by the state. And, long story short, that's not really our realm, right? Because we're actually working with something that we wanted to be based as a municipal symbol. And
maybe.
Sorry, is everything okay? All right, so moving ahead, this is Paris. I really like their work. It's a little grainy on my screen. Sorry about that, but they had a couple elements of the work that I thought were neat. One, you've got the sort of Eiffel Tower shape with the A, then you've got the dot and the I, which they then used as the dot or the location dot down below in this sort of integrated campaign. So again, kind of in that kind of global trend. Sao Paulo, Brazil really used a ton of just color. So they actually had this whole color scheme thing that you can kind of see in the different banners there. But like this actually broke down into like regions. I think the colors symbolize like different like industries or zones. But this was Torino or Turin. There's a whole thing. Like if you go look this one up, basically like the blocks mean one thing and the red line means another thing and the blue things mean other things. It's a really complex system, but they have this whole thing, their own typeface. It's a UNESCO recognized thing. So there's some really extreme examples too, where it was like, these are beautiful and very inspiring. And actually Oslo was one that was a lot like us in that their budget was about the same size. They had roughly the same number of budgets under or of logos under management, and they were facing really similar challenges. Now, they also have a much greater budget to do this kind of work than we did. So, we sort of had to really do it a little bit more from scratch and with the help of a lot of partners, really on a pro bono basis. So, I'm going to kind of quickly run through this. I hope I'm doing well on time. Let's kind of go back through and actually talk about our identity now that we sort of talked through kind of what was out there in the space. Again, I was hired part of 301 resident engagement. I show up and I get a meeting with the mayor and we're talking about like what is the priorities, and like one of them is the whole website is trash and all of it looks terrible and our look is bad. You got to fix it. Like, okay, that's a lot. And so we had a series of meetings with different local agencies, basically trying to pitch them like, would you pick up a pro bono project to do this? And most of them were like, no, because this will never launch. Like, you're insane. And Ogilvy was kind enough to say yes. And I just said, hey, look, no matter what happens, I will guarantee you that if you spend your time on this, we'll ship something of what you've done. So we started to look at what we had, what is out there, today. So 1837, we adopt the seal. 1892, the municipal device actually gets introduced into the city kind of in a backhanded way through a contest with the Chicago Tribune, right? And so this thing sort of floats around, and the idea behind it, you can see it's very nautical, is that it's actually Y-shaped. It's the convergence of the rivers, okay? And so it kind of hangs out and people are like, well, that's kind of a symbol. Chicagoans have always had this real pride in our city. And so there's a seal, but there's also this. Finally, they adopt the flag. We'll talk a little bit more about that. There's also the municipal badge. These are all things that are actually written into the record. So you can go and you can look in your municipal code and you can look up and see what these things are. You can also just go to design.chicago.gov, and I've got a lot of stuff up there for you about this. The municipal pennant is actually described in the code, but not well enough that you can actually make one. And I have not been able to find one. So again, I'll just say this really quickly. Everything you're about to hear, I am not an historian. So this is not like nobody can ever find one. This is like me as a designer trying to figure out where we're moving ahead and having to look at the past. This is what I looked at and what I found. So we'll go through this pretty quickly. So, okay, we did all the dates. Baby shows up in 1854. From what we can tell, it's when it was added via, via the, again, municipal code. Actually, it's described in the code what the seal is. I couldn't find any. We'll get into that. 33 and 39, we add the next stars. So it starts with 2 stars in the flag. We go to 3 and then 4. And pretty clearly from the layout of the flag, it was intended to be 4 stars max, right? That was kind of the build of the flag. And if you go to design.chicago.gov, you get a graphic that describes the ratios that Wallace Rice described. So, okay, here we go. Municipal device. So this is at, again, water. The city then actually turns it upside down and puts that out as their device quite often. And actually in the municipal code, that should be on every police car. But if you turn this thing upside down, then what happens is that, it's a peace symbol. And after 1968, the cops were not really enamored with having peace symbols in their devices and on their cars. So we kind of saw this symbol diminish. But again, it was turned upside down to represent the reversal of the flow of the Chicago River. This is one of the earliest examples I could find of this seal. It's 1880. So this is kind of the way they were set back in the day. A lot of them were set in this really big surround, right? And a lot of them were hand drawn, and most of them are actually like they're copies. We don't have a lot of originals, at least that I could find. Again, didn't spend an extensive time finding them outside of just trying to see what the examples were. And as you can see from these early examples, actually the crest or the shield is really ripped off of coins, right? This is basically a coin at the time. This is where they were getting their ideas from. So here it is a little closer. Again, 1880s. The ship is kind of sailing away. Baby's laying down, kind of bald. Here we go. This is 1886. So now this is a police station surround. Again, there's no actual name of the city yet, right? You're just kind of seeing it because you're seeing it in the presence of other stuff that says, hey, this is the city of Chicago. So here's just these things. Now all of a sudden we start seeing it get cleaned up, right? This is letterhead from 1894 from one department. Baby's laying down. We got more stars. Ship's going the other way. Very crisp wear, right? It's 1895. Now the baby is totally in his shell and he's laying down. Now we definitely have the surround. We've got the 4th March, right? But we're still doing the circles. We don't have all of our stuff yet. Now it's getting a little funky. It's 1903. We've kind of lost the rest of it. This is the open mic First American, because it looks like, even though he's holding a bow and arrow, he'd probably be, at the Improv. This is the Mo. This is a Hugh Grossner letterhead. He was like one of the commissioners, but that baby looks totally like a Mo. I'm sorry, it just does. Move along a little bit more of Mo. What you can basically see from this point forward is that we start to get into actual pressings and actual like real lithography, right? Or real like printing of symbols. So now the baby's, sitting up, everybody's flipped around. It starts to resemble much more of the modern seal, right? This is 1918. Even through most of the 20th century, we have really different versions. 1927, they just went backwards. This one actually is still in use. Earliest examples we found is 1936, but if you get official correspondence from the mayor's office, very often it will be sealed like this. sometime in the 40s or 50s, this version, 50 or 60, this one. This decal, I think, is, you can see it's Union Shop printed. These are all, by the way, in the library. You can go there. The Newberry has the majority of these. That's like the last analog, I think, right there, last analog seal. Or this one, color. Because you can still see, if you look at the color version here, like there's some nice spread on like the blues. Now, this is, obviously 2019. This is what we're rolling with. And that is the monocolor. That's in the mayor's office, just cracks me up. So moving ahead, what are we doing these days? What is this stuff? The Chicago design system work that we did then was to try to do something that was a little bit more inclusive, right? So we went back and we looked at all the history, not just of that, but a lot of other neighborhood symbology and other symbology about Chicago, right? And trying to figure out what the different symbols meant, not only when they were introduced, but also why they were introduced, and then what resonated with people today, right? And so the thing that resonated with people today basically was the flag. That was pretty much it. So we went with that, right? So the box is the size and shape of a flag. The star is the right proportions. We'll get into that. And the typeface is big shoulders. That's ours. Two different ways to lock it up, vertical and horizontal. Different ways to do partnership, right? Both with those sister agencies. Again, how do you create that relationship of this is part of Chicago, but also distinct because they have their own identity and their own system. You're going to notice some of these typefaces. There was a point there, again, PK, that dude delivered. I mean, I'm just saying, there were a lot of times, like most of 2019, 2020, where we were walking around faking it. I had very little support. I'm a team of one, or was, for the majority of this work, outside of some interns, folks like Derek and others. So this was actually using Montserrat from Google Type, because if PK, you either one, couldn't get the work done because he was working for so long on spec on the notion that this may or may not ever launch. And then two, because the character set was so big, it had to be internationalized. And we had to release it through Google Fonts. Part of the deal I made with Ogilvy was that we would love to work with them, but all the work that we did had to be open sourced and available for everybody to use in their own design. So anyway, these are the different department logos. This is the idea of mashups. We had none of these are licensed. So just to be very clear, this is an unlicensed presentation. But this was the idea that we sold internally. It was like, hey, this is sort of what this is supposed to be. And we'd get all these questions about this internally. Like, well, what happens when somebody, mashes it up with the Nazi symbol? And we're like, well, that's an opportunity for us then to really say, like, look, that's not our values. Our values are this, and this is the difference, right? And in the meantime, this is our opportunity to really celebrate all these things. So what is it? Again, very basic, very foundational. Colors, taking them mostly from the flag, other collateral. Actually, flag blue on white is not accessible. So most of the time in our color system, we use what here was originally called Bahama blue. Now we call it Chicago blue. This is the actual typeface that PK from PK's type company that I'm forgetting the name of because I'm going through this too fast. But this is his typeface, 3 different ones, right? There is the standard weight, just solid Chicago. There's the stencil, and there's a celebratory. So beautiful, beautiful, beautiful work by him. Really, rooted in Chicago's past in a variety of ways. We looked at a number of typeface examples over the past really century of Chicago type design, and looking at different faces that had both that extremely long, angular, and kind of sharp notion, right, or sharp kind of character. There's a lot of type that came from Chicago, especially in the early part of the 20th century. It was really inspirational. And then trying to make it modern, and give it some of the angular feels. Some of the things that people have said, maybe good or bad, the W's or things like that. It has taken me a long time for them to grow on me, but they have really grown on me, and I think that personally, I think they're a wonderful choice. I also really love the celebratory or line font, with its notions really grounded in house music. Typeface is available at Google, right? Google Fonts, and you can use, there's special characters to get the right Chicago star. It's in the typeface and the flag boxes as well. So you don't really have to make all that stuff on your own. If you want to make things with these things, you can go ahead and do that just with hitting that typeface. Again, when I say the star, there actually was directions on how to make a star, right? And so, uh, very specifically, the geometry of the flag is set, but over time it's changed, right? And if you look around the city, you'll see there are both really fat stars. Like, part of this geometry is rooted in the fact that up until this time, there was sort of a Star of David sized star that was used by both Chicago Police Department and the city generally. So if you go past the police station on Foster, the stars there are much broader, much more like two triangles overlapping each other. If you look around the 80s or 90s, for a long time, they're actually very spiny and very thin, very sharp. And again, it's just sort of like, you can see different eras. Part of it is different mayors, different administrations, but part of it is also just different styles. So we tried to really go back and kind of ground everything in as much in the past as we could. And really the idea of this kind of, neighborhood collaboration or kind of community partnership idea, this really came out of, there's a bunch of neighborhood crests from uh, really every neighborhood from 1890s to 1920s, where people actually made little crests. So uh, Lincoln Park is a laurel, I think. Lincoln Square is like a swan. My neighborhood's a pickle. Um, so we did a bunch of work internally to kind of show what this could be, right? And we would try to sell this internally, and people would say, "You're crazy." And I'd say, "Well, okay," but I would drink coffee from that, and I would shop with that, and I would wear that. So, we presented it, we got it, it worked kind of. We had seen some stuff before that didn't really work that well or feel that great all the time as being part of the city. It worked. And these are all sorts of examples of places where we can put stuff, right? The weird little line, 4 stars and a line, somehow means the city in municipal marketing speak. It's a whole other weird world, right? But that means official to them. We work across a lot of devices. This is a kiosk work where we're trying to figure out ADA accessibility, and also what the wraparound will look like for these payment kiosks. Hopefully they come out soon. It's a whole other thing. This is a street and sand truck. I didn't put in the gratuitous picture of the cop car with the kind of taxi wraparound. They got to design their own cars. That's a whole other conversation about how power and authority works in the city. We'll just be thankful for snowplows with that seal. Hopefully, as we start to change things up and things calm down, we'll start to roll out more uniform branding on things like that. But this stuff is everywhere. And overall, your plan for changing it is it may never change, right? Um, this is actually in the mayor's office. And I took this when we were pitching the new mark. And part of the reason why we went with the new mark versus the old is because the old one has some symbology that I don't think is really representative of Chicago in the 21st century or where we want to go. And it's going to be there forever because this stuff is in places like this, but it doesn't have to be the whole future. So for you, about you, made here. That's where your font comes from. You can learn more there. Here's a couple more examples in use. This was some of the early stuff we were doing. So we're starting to kind of get transitionals, TV, business cards, this presentation. It's not really super set, as you can see. It could be sharper, memo. A couple other pieces, Instagram and microsites and all sorts of stuff. Uh, all your legalized cannabis reminders. Things really changed with COVID. Um, I don't really do design work. I haven't really done design work at the city for about a year, which has been really crazy because basically COVID happened. And so we've really been standing up all this critical IT stuff. And I'm not going to say we're doing an awesome job, but we're trying. So we've really been focused on that. So all the design system work we've done, if you go to one of those two sites, you'll see kind of the more modern stuff. But we still have some work to do. So we've been doing that. We've been doing a lot of work with accessibility and translation, trying to improve that in particular on those sites. We're also working to hire a technical accessibility compliance officer. So hopefully that happens soon. There'd be somebody making sure all of our stuff goes to market for everyone. So as we look at a couple more things here really quickly, and let me just do a time check so I'm not talking for way too long. Let's see. Okay, cool. So here, real quick. Alrighty, so this is just one of the first appearances of our brand. So, there's one thing for your brand to roll out with the mayor shaking your hand and the whole 9 yards. It's another thing when it's a pandemic. It really is kind of a bummer. Although we've seen some really incredible uses of it, and it's been, again, a really good and strong kind of baseline set of foundational stuff. So as we've gone out and produced stuff in multiple languages, it's been awesome having this typeface. And I'll just show you, like this thing is actually this is a template. So again, kind of going back to this notion of municipal marketing, one of the things that we had to do with the public mark was say that this mark in particular could mean the city, and that different variants of this mark could mean the city. So this could mean the city, and that's one version of that template. That could mean the city, that thing at the top saying CDPH. All these could, right? And so we had to kind of take them away from these other versions of it, which has both been good and bad, because like we had some really good stuff there, but then this has none of those things on it. And actually, I know this is produced by the city, but I don't know that other people do. Now, you may argue that it doesn't matter because, I mean, it's just team up, mask up. I mean, do you really have to know who produced it? Maybe, I don't know. And here's another one. So basically, if they come to us without templates or without any ability to do stuff, we have some kind of pre-built stuff folks can use. Otherwise, we'll partner with individual creatives and work on a lot of stuff. And people abuse standards all the time. So if you look at like we are all one home team, that blue line, everybody stretches the blue line. Okay, not supposed to stretch the blue line, but you know what? It was a pandemic, and we never really rolled out all the final like ends. You get it. Anyway, I'm gonna keep on moving on because I'm afraid I'm running out of time. This is another version of it. It's totally knocked out Chicago mark. But again, hopefully you can recognize that campaign as ours. Chicago Public Library took it a different direction, but they're still using it, so we love them for it. This is an example of ways in which you can see our brand represented. So guess what? Those 5 signs are all from the city. Yeah. Anyway, this is actually from somebody down the street. This was awesome. When we saw this happening, I was like, yeah, this is good. Other people are using our stuff. I don't know who did this. Maybe I don't need to. Anyway, here's some different ways in which you can get access to this stuff. So again, design.chicago.gov. The Figma is a little bit crufty, but it's up there, figma.com/@Chicago. We have some bootstrap code up there, and you can get the fonts at fonts.google.com. So again, it's been a weird trip. Thanks to PK and Gabe and Steve and the folks at Ogilvy. And thanks to the mayor and the first lady for this crazy trip. And thank you for listening. And that's what I have to say. So what's up?
Awesome. That was great, Jason. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Here, I'm going to sit down so you can see my ugly face. Hey, what's up? Here we go.
Okay, so I figure we could probably roll into the Q&A and just have a few minutes to chat about some stuff. So, first off, I guess there's this question that really stood out to me, and it was, do you think that there is a time limit on like the branding of a city? Like, do you foresee this being rebranded sometime in the future? Like, how long do you feel like this identity is going to last?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Honestly, I don't know. I really don't know. So, okay, the deal is uh, the everything else that you saw is enshrined in the public record, right? Even the municipal device that people were like, meh, it's in there. This is not in there. So this very well could be something a different mayor comes in and goes, that's part of Mayor Lightfoot's identity. We're getting rid of that. You know, I don't know. My hope is that it would be enshrined because I think that a couple of things. I mean, one, we rooted it very specifically in Chicago's design history. We tried not to be cute and come up with some crazy logo. This is one that belongs very firmly to us, and it's representative of people. And I guess like if the city does away with it or doesn't do it, that's okay because I think that people will still tattoo themselves with flags and do stuff like that, and then this way they'll have the right star and the right kind of format, and they'll know that stuff, which they didn't know before.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned that, there are some checks and balances in a way. So who are typically the people who are the stakeholders in whether or not a design gets passed on and used?
Well, whoever has money and authority, it's kind of like anywhere that just is very different inside of government, so it is typically, um, kind of one or two ways to look at it. One is that it is very rarely my work to do actual design. It is my work to provide things to empower other designers to do stuff, right? Which is a very weird idea, but that's kind of how you operate at city scale, So, for example, like on the website, we have 200 content authors. They can make whatever they want. So we have to make patterns that they then hopefully use successfully, but often don't. And then we have to kind of police that. So, who anybody could be creating stuff from outside agencies we've never spoken with who are working with the mayor's office. That's been very much a part of COVID, right? Most of my work with COVID has been mayor's office and public health, right, in some way, shape, or form, and mostly trying to figure out, how we emphasize, standards and making sure that people are used to working in this space as opposed to other spaces. So the people making the design decisions again are typically power and money. It's the 19 departments. It's the police, fire, CPS, libraries having their own independent budgets. So you try to basically, instead of saying, hey, this is the way it has to be, you say, look, here's an easy way. And people tend to go, oh, well, that's great. I like you have standards. We'll use those. And you just need to be a little flexible. And hopefully when COVID dies down, we get a better chance to implement and and make a real run at having more of a services team and more infrastructure. Hopefully proving that money spent on this and spent on design helps in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, how much sway money really has as far as design goes, especially when it comes to something as large and as breathing as a city's design system. Have you considered how much the new brand would potentially save the city in fees or anything like that? Is that something that gets thought about?
Yeah, I mean, well, we think that, it would be between 5 and 10 million. And that was from that one slide earlier. And, and we're not there yet. Um, but I think that I would like to say, at least personally within my department, I can say we've saved hundreds of thousands of dollars pretty clearly. And typically what that is on is, you know, it's kind of changed the relationship, which is to say that before, people basically said, look, like, you have the seal and you have some weird colors from the flag, and seals are hard to design with. It's a hard logo, right? Small, it looks like a weird stain, and big, like, it's just full of things you don't want to see. I mean, just the symbols in our seal, like, they're not representative of where we want to go. So, long story short, yeah, I think, we looked at Oslo's numbers, and, the thing that really got me, to be honest with you, was this. Like, if you look at Oslo, their budget's about 11 billion, which is the same as our budget. And so their numbers and our numbers are very similar in a lot of different ways around spend. The big difference is population, right? Which is to say that Oslo spends about 4 times as much on their people as we do, in terms of services. So when you look at what they get, their stuff is beautiful and their process is great, and our stuff is still a little bit more under construction. And we're hoping to see some of that savings, and we're hoping, again, to kind of change the conversation with designers, not to take away designer freedom, but to give designers enough constraints that they don't have to start with, like, oh, I'm working for this massive institution and nobody can actually tell me what color blue is in the flag or what color red I should use. Um, that's the deal.
Gotcha. So there are a lot of moving parts, right? So you can't always so vehemently control everything that's being put out there, but I'm really curious about what the process is for like accessibility testing and the journey with accessibility and how that is put into the standards and the system that you're trying to put in place. Would you just be able to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's been a really tough journey, to be honest with you. You know, I, I don't want to cast a lot of stones for people who came before or stuff that was prior. Um, I'll just say that, I took over the web team uh, really, like, literally about a year ago now, and it was like mid March. So I took it over, and 2 days later we went into quarantine for COVID. And the first things that happened were people with disabilities, in particular, National Federation of the Blind Illinois, were like, can't get access to your stuff. What's the story? And so, we had a good dialogue with them, and we did a lot of stuff early on that was really strong. And we're still doing a lot of that stuff on some of our HTML and CSS. So a lot of accessibility testing with Pally, a lot of testing with WebAIM, and a lot of testing with a couple other tools like that, Site Improve. In 2021, we're still slow because of COVID. We're going to stand up better translation across chicago.gov, and then Site Improve across the site to try to give us a handle on, like, basically what's out there. It's about 33,000 pages, about 20,000 PDFs. So there's a lot of stuff, and a lot of, like, stuff that, again, you talk about, can add, person with an 8th grade education on a mobile phone who speaks Spanish as a primary language, can they get access to your stuff and understand it? And we've had a lot of fights internally, again, with well-meaning partners, right? A lot of people who produce dashboards for us where, you make a dashboard in a Power BI or a Tableau, and you want to share information about, like, hospital capacity. And, for a screen reader, that information doesn't appear, right? So it's a stop. So, we've gotten them to at least post to the data portal, and we've built standards into, like, open standards, so they can use HTML or HTML, CSS, CSV driven charts to kind of create, similar experiences, but in accessible formats. And we have a new, I'm rambling, but it's an important topic, so I want to let people know all the stuff we're doing. We have a new commissioner of accessibility, Rachel Arfa. Commissioner Arfa is great. And so we're working with her to basically identify in departments, could you have, and this is like super new, so don't, it's still kind of happening. Um, could you have a department deputy commissioner who would then be responsible for accessibility for that department? And then in cases where departments made a decision to go with something that was not accessible, that we could ask them to submit a reason in writing why they thought that was appropriate. And honestly, there may be times where that could be appropriate. And like an example is a lot of the stuff that CDPH produces. Um, I do think like typically separate but equal and accessibility as in all equity issues is terrible. But there are some things here where it's not separate but equal, but it's two separate versions, which is not one based on ability, but really based on interest level, which is that for most people, all I really care about is a handful of metrics that let me know whether my family is going to be safe or not and what I need to do about it. And that should be presented in a way that anybody can get to, right? And then there's the stuff that if I'm an epidemiologist or a member of the medical community, I really care about deeply. And maybe it's worth it to me to have a lot more control over information in some way that, that kind of tool is worthwhile. And, that's kind of long and the short. And I'm running out of juice on that topic. So anything else on that? We're also going to hire a taco. I'll just say that hopefully soon. We have the position cleared. That was a big win for us this year. So that is going to go into the budget. Government is very slow, but a taco, I never knew either. Technical accessibility compliance officer. So, I wrote I technically edited a book on this stuff and I care about accessibility. So I have some tools, but not a lot of tools and not for a lot of different subjects, mobile and a lot of other physical environment. We're going to have a technical person who can come in and really kind of run the program ideally. And that's going to be a joint position with MOPD. So we're hoping that that is going to be posted sometime here in 2021.
That's so great and so needed. Oh, that's so exciting to hear that it's starting to be implemented. So I want to ask you a question, Jason. So what was with the baby in the shell? Like, what was that about? Do you know?
Yeah, everything. Yeah, if you, I didn't specifically want to go into that because if you start to go into what those things mean, they mean terrible things. Okay, so and kind of going back to the public mark, yeah, like the baby in the shell is actually the least offensive thing in there, and probably because it's the least understood. The first American on the shore and the ship, a little bit different. The that is the spirit of the lakes. You can actually look it up in the municipal code. It's like the spirit of the lakes or the grace of the lakes, but it is in essence like it is the benevolent spirit of the Great Lakes, like breathing down on Chicago and wishing it well. It's the only thing in there that's good, but you can't like have a baby as your logo. So we went with what we did.
Oh man. Okay, now I think I can sleep at night knowing what that was. I would have been forever curious.
I will tell you what, I will actually find it in the municipal code if you're interested, and I will let people know. And I'll just say this, if you're interested, you can look up on your own. There's actually council wars. So here's how old this stuff is. There was an attempt to rebrand the city in 87 under Harold Washington, and they wanted to change the seal to DuSable, right? Who's really the founder of Chicago. And they flipped out. And by they, I mean primarily Ed Burke, right? And Ed Burke and Harold Washington got into a huge fight about it. And the end of the fight was basically that they changed the description of some of the elements of the seal to remove some offensive language, but they didn't do much else. And it was kind of this big impasse. So honestly, like one of the moments that I was really happy for was when Ed Burke was indicted. I'm like, he's going to have his hands way too full to worry about some logo, and the timing worked out. So here we are.
Oh man. Okay. I have one more question for you because I know we only have a few minutes left, and it can be sort of a big question. So I'll just preface it by that. So we're really curious about, so when it comes to beginning stages of research for the rebrand all the way up to the final-ish brand book, how long has that taken? And were there any specific constraints that you had to keep in mind while doing so?
Wow. Yeah. Well, okay. So it started. It's 2021. Okay. It started in earnest in May or June of 2018. And we had the first conversations. And then it went for about a year. And the constraint was we had no money. But we would, we would cheerlead for Ogilvy and for PK and for anybody who wanted to help us. And we asked a lot of people for help, and actually, some showed up and some didn't. DePaul University was great; they gave us a ton of help. Their students gave us help, but it came and went. So that was constraint one, and then constraint two was once Mayor Emanuel said he wasn't going to run. It was basically like, what is this? This is dead. It's like, no, 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 this isn't dead. Like we presented this to Mayor Emanuel and we got his approval and we're like, okay, we're gonna roll this out. And 6 weeks later, he's like, I'm out. Like, oh. So then we basically we had nothing. So like Ogilvy wouldn't return my calls. Honestly, man, I wouldn't return my calls either. I don't blame them. I kept calling, but they just wouldn't pick up, And PK just kept churning away. And we tried to ask other people to help, and people were like, no. So, just persistence. Derek helped a ton, right? Derek Ramos. We had a team, Lucas and Tate, who helped a ton. And so you basically, one of the things you learn from Organizing for Action and for Obama for America is that you take the people who you're with and you try to learn their story and let them know your story and find your shared values and then figure out what you can do together with your skills to move what you want ahead. So you basically get just good at, hey, this is what we're doing. And I think the big superpower of it is that there was no money changing hands. So eventually, like Ogilvy or Google or somebody paid PK, but we wouldn't. Because I'm like, the minute I pay one of these people, all this crazy stuff is going to happen. I got to go through a procurement, and why didn't you let me do it? And why didn't I? So I was just like, look, I'm going to ask the people who the mayor's office introduced me to as the partners. And honestly, one of the big constraints of working that way, and the thing that really stunk about it, was that we had to work in secret and it was never really supported. So I would do stuff like publish this publicly, but we really couldn't go out to the public and say, like, what do you think? Right? We had 12 different concepts. I chose this concept due to modularity, but I chose all this stuff, and I struggled with that a lot. Like, am I choosing for me or am I choosing for people? I'm trying to choose for utility and for what best represents a city and what best addresses, again, readability, usability, language access, accessibility. So a lot of this stuff was designed with those things in mind very clearly. And we built it to be open and free, again, because then you not only avoid all that procurement stuff, but you keep everybody on the right side of the project. And so then when you hassle them and they're like, I don't know, you're like, you're doing it for Chicago. Come on, like do it for them, So yeah, that's it, I guess.
Okay, so I think this is all the time we have. There are tons of other questions that I'm sure people have, but I think this was really, really useful and definitely, I think, taught us a lot about our system and the decisions behind it. And thank you so much for your time and your expertise and your service for the city.
Oh, well, that's so kind of you all. Thank you so much for being here. And thanks for participating. I'm at jason.kunesh@cityofchicago.org. So you can email me. You probably have a hard time getting to feedback through our website. That's a whole other thing we'll try to get to in 2021. But thanks for the invite. Thank you to Melody for doing this. Thank you to Christian. This is an awesome organization. I hope you all support it. And yeah, thanks for coming out, everybody, and be safe and healthy. Hopefully see you soon in person in 2021.
Fingers
Thank you,
crossed.
Jason. Thank you, Melody, and thank you everyone else for coming. All right.
Thank you so much.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks, Jason.
This was awesome.
Thanks, everyone.